It's Billy. Right now. Yo, what if I got attacked by the clones? What if the builder think they found a better stone? What if the beat don't match with the metronome? What if that means you walk your path alone? Call me a vagabond. If all these streets leading to Rome, then wherever I lay is my home. It's Brooklyn, boy strong. I manifest, I'm in the zone. Y'all silly better back up off my throne. Listen, boy nice, better give him his propers. How we come out sane from all the mosh pits. How we found the key to the game without a locksmith. How we seem to manage these lanes is so obnoxious. He let it flow from the brain, trusting the process. A vet journeyman on multiple rosters. If I want it, I go out and get it and cop it. A monster with limitless options. Man, like goddamn, y'all gon' soon figure out who I am. We stay cooking, y'all used to that spam. Western beef, I might square up with the square dance. Look, I change plans, not even a southpaw, I'm an outlaw with a rare stance. Your crew never had a fair chance.
Why's that?
I kill a whole bear with my bare hands. Oh, they studied the dark? Well, I was raised in it. Brain shifted, the kid displayed insane physics. Best story never told, and it ain't finished. How we handled a rock, spun and kept the same pivot. I frame different, hot like a flame kitchen. A whole 2 levels out of your range gifted. Catch me on the highway, lane switching. Or right at the top of your bay wish list. It's Billy. Right now. It's Billy.
Yo, what up?
How's it going, y'all? Welcome to another episode of How Billy Sees It. Today is January 23rd, 2023, and we have a very special episode. We have an episode with a very special guest. This is a really cool guy, somebody I've known for a long time, really good friend, and I was excited to do this. I'm glad we're going to do this, and I want to jump in. Usually, instead of an intro, I'll just jump right in to who this is. This is Daniel Tutt. Daniel Tutt, can you see? Hey, what up, D? Oh, hold on. Let me get that mic, but... DT, what's up?
What's up, buddy?
There
How are
we
you,
go,
man?
There we go.
You hear me all right?
Yeah, we hear you. How you doing, man?
It's good to be here. Good evening. What's going on?
I'm good,
Doing
man.
well.
Yeah.
Happy New Year. Are we still saying Happy New Year?
It's the 23rd. I think we can still say it. Yeah, Happy New Year. How's it been for you so far?
It's been nice, man. Just focusing on my health, staying healthy. Been riding a lot, waking up early.
Are these like resolutions? Are these like, are you a resolution guy?
This year there was actually usually no. Usually I'm not a resolution person whatsoever, but this year I did a health cleanse. It's been great. So, and yeah, I mean I feel like I'm not the only one that's been on the health thing.
No.
The holidays just took it out of me. All of those just heavy meals, and it was just too idle. So been going on a lot of runs. Really,
That's great.
oh yeah, a lot of people are getting sick too. So I'm just trying to keep my immune system up.
Smart. That's the right move. Yeah. I got a bunch of stuff I added. I got stuff in the basement. Got a little bench press, and I do some hand clean stuff. Got some weights.
That's right. Last time I was over, I took a nice video of you doing it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. No, but running is another ballgame. So shout out to you for that, bro. Shout out to you for that. And yeah, my wife is doing the same thing. She did a cleanse and she stopped drinking. She's completely over that. She says hi, by the way.
What's up, Sheba? Tell Sheba that part of my cleanse is also no alcohol, which has been a lot easier than I thought. Maybe I didn't have a drinking problem at all, because it's pretty easy, man, and it's pretty nice. I mean, I feel like if you can try to do a few social situations without drinking, and they go well,
Yeah,
then you have a model that you can replicate, and you're off to the races.
exactly.
So,
That's the key. That's what started for Sheba. She had to see that it was possible, and now I think she's on her like eighth month. I'm really proud of her.
that
So
is that is that's something to be proud of for sure.
seriously, seriously, especially with a like a husband like me who's drinking beer all the time. But anyway, my guy, um, D, you're a philosopher, man. We met in grad school at American University, Ethics, Peace, and Global Affairs. And all these years later, you're a philosopher. Is that right?
I mean, it's a debate. It's a debate within the field of philosophy about in a colloquial sense, a philosopher could be defined as somebody that gets paid to philosophize in an academic institution.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. In that sense, it's pretty clear boundaries of definition. There's another sense, which is a much more almost aristocratic definition of a philosopher, even I don't know, even coming from someone like Plato or something like this, which is that there's actually very few philosophers at any one time in society, and that the vocation of a philosopher is meant to be defined based on a type of rarity of a philosopher who invents new concepts, novel concepts that or produces new thoughts which the philosophical community did not have before this individual became a philosopher. In that sense, you could say some philosophers believe that there's only a handful of true philosophers at any given time in the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a
Uh,
higher bar right there for sure.
that's an extremely high bar. Um, However, I tend to follow the Marxist thinker Gramsci, who has a much more broader egalitarian conception of philosophy, which is not reducible to everyone is a philosopher anytime they philosophize, but rather I would argue for something like an intention of mine would be to try to engage in organic intellectual activity. Um, it just so happens that academically, I've been mostly drawn to study philosophy. So I did my dissertation with somebody who I think qualifies as one of those rare philosophers, Alain Badiou, who we could talk about him if you want. But so I've been exposed to um, some of the best philosophers and studied with them. And I've also been able to teach philosophy at a lot of different places, from like the jail, the DC jail, which has been an incredible experience, to just like adjuncting all over the DC, Virginia, Maryland area. Um, so teaching at different colleges, different universities, community colleges. Um, I became in love with the idea of teaching philosophy, introducing people to the life of the mind, and realizing that it's kind of like an almost what I would call a kind of secular conversion, right? Um, the conversion is not necessarily to philosophy proper. It's not like to a specific domain of philosophy, but it's rather a conversion into a way of seeing the world, a type of speculative thinking, a type of critical thinking, which is a kind of tool box that you can pull from for your whole life. So philosophy for me has to be radically open, radically egalitarian, and by organic intellectual, which I mentioned before, I didn't define what that means. It would mean that philosophy has to be in the service of a collective liberation of humanity. And then, of course, the question is, how is that achieved? What are the dynamics? What are the impediments? What are we struggling to overcome? Right. That then is the task of of a critical philosopher. Yeah, is to help the struggle understand its own impediments and understand um, the and frankly 300-400 years ago, this would be what a theologian does in some sense, right? So I think that theology and philosophy, in fact, are quite close if we're looking at the question of philosophy of emancipation, right? Um, so that's what I would say, is that I am a philosopher because I fell in love with thinking. I'm a philosopher because I love teaching. I'm a philosopher because I'm interested in philosophy as a path or an avenue to the question of emancipation.
That's really interesting. And I love that. I love, first off, that the description in its fullness. But growing up, the vocation of philosophy was always, it always seemed to me something. Um, it didn't present itself as having practical utility, as though it were. I heard about it. My early introductions to philosophy made it seem as though it were just a bunch of often white men sitting around talking about things in a highfalutin way, separate from what's happening, different from the populace, maybe, not dealing with the actual conditions of the reality of the everyday person in the society. And I've learned through my own experience, and what you're articulating right there is I think the best way to look at philosophy, that we all, like, it is something that is all always available to us, like, to each of us,
Mm-hmm.
this to cultivate um an ability to discern, to observe, and to articulate those impediments to the greater way of being, greater way of
Mm-hmm.
existing.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoy philosophy for those very same reasons, man. Um, and you in particular, your thing is you've studied psychoanalysis. Is that correct? This is a
Mm-hmm.
specific approach for philosophy. Can you talk more about what psychoanalysis is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that the injunction of philosophy um, has a prehistory. It doesn't start with Socrates. It actually starts in ancient Egypt. But the problem with that is that we don't have access to the texts as much, and so when you say that there is uh, a sense that philosophy is a kind of Eurocentric or white endeavor, um, it's true, and it's also not true, right? Um, I mean, I just got done writing a chapter on Huey Newton, for example, who is a formative figure in the Black Panther Party of America, um, and he was an autodidact, which means he was insanely self-taught. And here's someone who thought that the struggle for Black liberation necessitated a deep immersion into the entirety of Western philosophy, and that's exactly what he did, from Plato all the way up through Mao Zedong, um, and really became an innovative thinker within the field of Marxist study in the 20th century, which Marxist study is a field of endeavor which carves out a role for philosophers. Right, Marxism has, since its inception, um, thought of the function of an intellectual in the struggle, in the class struggle, as I think a very central, in a central way. Um, and yes, then we're introduced to the whole question of, okay, um, is philosophy, in fact, and this is, of course, a huge debate in Plato's Republic with the allegory of the cave and the guardians of the cave, right? Um, uh, there's a huge debate about whether there's a huge debate about whether philosophy, in fact, is a universal access to all, or whether ultimately only some uh, 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 have access to being philosophers. And some people argue that even there's a split between Socrates and Plato on this question.
Yeah.
So therefore, I follow much more in line with a more communistic version of philosophy, in part because the life of the mind is something which can never be, which capitalism can never fully capture. some
Right.
sense. The
Right.
life of the mind, if you like, has to be fully uncommodified. It has to be um, um, radically, radically horizontal and public and open, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and you feel that when you teach, right? You learn from people who have not read any philosophy. If you bring them into the mode of speculative thinking, you're going to learn a tremendous amount from them,
Right. Exactly.
from their life experience.
Yeah.
So you Socrates demonstrates that you can turn anyone into a philosopher, and in fact, the people who have gone through uh, life the most in the most intense or the most challenging of ways, if they are shown how to tap into philosophizing,
Right.
they are the most profound most often, right?
Right. Right.
And that's what I learned when I was teaching in the jail system, of course, right?
Right.
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 So
Without
it's
a
a
doubt.
liberation device, right? Is the idea. You just have to open up the nozzle to let it go, to sort of, and that's the that's the freedom part of it, is to sort of tap into something which is a flow, which is a type of way of analyzing the world, but also yourself, and keeping and a lot of it is also, I think, keeping a desire for truth, because I believe that we live in a world which doesn't want people to have a desire for truth
Right.
in some
Yeah.
ways,
It
you know.
pulls it pulls that desire out of you. It completely stultifies your inquiry and punishes you
Yes.
for asking too many questions and all of this. Um, yeah, I think you're pointing to something too. I agree with you. I think that we all can access this. The question is simply, these are labels, philosopher like there are certain words that um, we identify with, but that we each are observing the real world. We each are grappling with it with our circumstances, with the words we have available to us. I
Hmm.
think the philosopher um, is deeply tied to like a whole tradition of thought and inquiry, and kind of like incorporates these prior ideas as foundations for their own observations, and tries to merge these things. You mentioned truth,
Hmm.
and I am big on this question. I'm from my media background. I think we go at truth in completely the wrong way. And as someone who just got off jury duty today, actually, and did it for the last 6 days, I got to witness firsthand the way that our admittedly flawed legal system attempts to grapple with the difficulty of truth. From the very moment from jury duty, we had a whole process that had to try to ascertain our biases, and the lawyers could pick us apart and choose this thing. And then we
Hmm.
have people who come in, and the lawyers represent, they demonstrate that this is an expert, this is a witness, this and that. And they're very careful about what kinds of information they present to the jury. We had to go up to the room several times. Um, so tell me about truth. Like,
Yeah.
how do we figure that out? Um, it seems like a simple question at first. This can kind of trick you, but is it?
Right. I mean, you had mentioned the question of psychoanalysis, and I feel like I'm gonna bring it import psychoanalysis in through hopefully addressing the question of truth. Um, so in a certain sense, I think that um, in Plato, for example, it's pretty well established that um, truth is something almost of the register of a super sensible, or of a sublime, or of a almost quasi traumatic level, right?
Mm.
In that sense, and this is intuitive. This should be intuitive, right?
When you say
Um,
super sensible, give me more. Give me another word. I mean,
what I mean is that truth is rare.
okay.
Truth is not um, something found in some kind of everyday empirical mode of existing in common. Truth, I think, actually is something that is forced on you. It often can hurt. It's something which is not self-evident. And so I think that let's take the realm of politics, for example. There's a great contemporary philosopher who says that um, politics becomes interested in the truth when you have two uh, competing conceptions of wrong, of what constitutes a wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about politics as an art of managing um, communities of wrong, um, you can kind of see immediately that the art of politics, the art of that kind of bureaucratic management of society, of the everyday suffering of people, is destined to run into an inability to sort of capture things. So, in other words, there's a sense in which, in the field of politics, people want the truth of the situation to be far afield, right? So this is actually what in political epistemology is called nominalism, right? It's a kind of conception of political truth which would be content to have a kind of relativist understanding of truth, or to um, not address the truth of the social totality. Like that's a whole other dimension that interests me, which is that like when we say that truth is rare, what we also mean is that the truth of social oppression, and this is actually a very big debate and critical thought, which is in the modern or even postmodern period, a lot of people say that um, oppression and exploitation and injustice has changed from how it used to be
Mm-hmm.
into such an order now, into such a transparent display of its own brutality, that in other words, exploitation, brutality is now so self-evident that a lot of left-wing academics are now, I don't know if you've heard this phrase, moving into what's called post-critique or post-critical forms of social analysis, which means that uh, they're no longer interested in a kind of unearthing of power at the true source, or kind of, you can think here of someone like Noam Chomsky
Hmm.
in Manufacturing Consent, where his objective was to burrow into the news apparatus and reveal some hidden machination, some hidden logic to it,
Right,
right?
right, right. But
Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, but an alarming trend, in my opinion, is left-wing academics who abandon this precise mode of critiquing power or of critiquing society, in part because they argue that the truth of that social order is now self-evident. Yeah. So this is what I mean by truth is rare, because if that's, and I think that they're right. I think that the brutalism of our society, the fact that, let's say, I don't know, 40% of black men are tied up with the criminal justice system. In some sense, it's so monstrous that what does it do to expose it is the argument of the post-critical left-wing academic.
what
And
what
that's
what
why
what is there beyond the critique? What would they be occupying their time with? I guess.
this is what is called the reparative turn in post critique, or this, a lot of this comes out of queer studies and other movements in academia that started in the 80s up through the 90s until now. And so they have argued that this kind of critical mode, which was trying to sort of burrow into systems of power and to sort of expose their inner logics, they argue that in our current social conditions, those methods don't elicit a shift in
Oh
the
yeah,
structures of power themselves.
I can
So
speak to that for
in a
sure.
sense, hold on, in a
Yeah.
sense,
Uh huh.
yeah, it's kind of like your experience at CNN. And this is why you need like a new critique of ideology, because if you present a video which exposes the inner workings,
Right.
the kind of cynicism of ideology, the cynicism of our age, will do what, right? Will kind of look at it like a deer in headlights in some sense. So
Yeah.
the idea is that exposure as a method is limited because it's too paranoid, and ultimately it doesn't elicit a change in the structure of power. But this is, of course, not how emancipatory movements used to work, right? We were
Yeah,
talking about we
it was all about giving sunlight to the
yeah. It
to
was
the
all
womb, to the
about
terrible thing.
it,
Yeah.
it was all about a kind of consciousness raising, because
Yes.
what is being assaulted here in the post-critical turn is a type of skepticism that they're shining onto the whole notion of consciousness raising in some sense.
Right.
And rather, they then emphasize different techniques of resistance. So their techniques of resistance are reparative, they're more focused on affect. And I think that a lot of it also emphasizes uh well, a lot of it is very problematic. I've I'll just say that. But I think one of the things that it represents is an uninterest in truth, right? If so, therefore, I think that there is a certain sense in which I wish to say that yes, indeed, truth is not truth is something which, from a psychoanalytic standpoint, because all psychoanalysis is sort of hinged on is the notion of the unconscious as a kind of operating logic of subjective life, right? So the idea there is that we are desiring beings, but our desire um, is not of our possession, right? It's actually found in our relations with others, and it is therefore kind of a socialized desire. So the field of otherness in psychoanalysis is an extremely what Freud opens up there is a set of insights for human conduct, for human behavior, for the character of the human being, which are extremely robust and extremely important, extremely interesting. So some philosophers argue that psychoanalysis is a necessary kind of tethering point for contemporary philosophy. That, in other words, if you want to do philosophy, you have to steep yourself in the truths of what psychoanalysis has to say about the human condition,
Right.
right? Because Freud famously said that he brings about a great narcissistic wound to humanity, right? So, like, if Galileo decenters the
Right.
Earth,
Right.
right? If Darwin decenters the species,
Mm,
Freud decenters the self. Freud
mm.
decenters uh, our egos are not home. There's a kind of interior otherness that we have to study in ourselves,
Right.
and so psychoanalysis becomes an art also of the fundamental demand of philosophy, which I mentioned at the beginning, which is to have self knowledge.
Right.
It just gives us a new intensified tool for cultivating that self knowledge.
Right. Right.
So now I
You
answered your question on that. Yeah.
you did, and you said a few things, man. Hmm. Well, are you able to see these comments, by the way?
No, I'm not. No, I cannot. I apologize.
All right. So HW Plainview was saying as you were talking, particularly as you were talking about, ooh, what was that term you introduced in earlier, Daniel?
Post critical.
Post
Post
critical.
critical.
He says sounds like
Yeah.
a movement away from CRT. Thank God. CRT, intersectionality, and gender identity theory are rooted in a brand of academia that eschews the rigors of falsifiability and only verifies the exact same abstractions of so-called race and white supremacy they mean to destroy. They also say, "I love you, Billy." I think this is my man E. Now the problem with these things is when you use words like or phrases like CRT, they're not properly defined. And when you group them up with CRT, gender identity theory, intersectionality, intersectionality is a useful approach to understanding how different social phenomena overlap and that there are different, different structures and challenges at play. even across the different categories that we talk about. So, a gender
Hmm.
struggle versus a labor struggle versus a racial struggle, and so I think that's useful. And and CRT suffers from the Fox News kind of characterization and definitions, and then there's the academic discipline of CRT, which has some merits, if you ask me. And then lastly, gender identity. I see this a lot of times. A lot of like cisgendered men seem to think that gender identity is a new phenomenon that has occurred in, what I'm saying, in the last 2 years or something. When again, something I've had to reply that gender identity is seeped into absolutely everything that we do in every society. And I point, like, people get upset at drag queen happy hour or drag queen story time. Jean Benet Ramsey was a child beauty pageant queen, right? And there's no reason for these little 4-year-old girls to be wearing bathing suits, like swimsuits and gowns, and looking pretty and putting makeup on, except that there's a version of a certain gender identity that is just the norm. However, it is the standard, and so it doesn't ring problematic in the same way, for a lot of people. And so again, this is just me responding straight to Mr. Plainview here, about those things. But on the question of truth, man, and what you said about sort of the dare in the headlights, and how it becomes unuseful, the truth. I find it odd. Like, so recently, Sean Hannity has publicly, no, it's not public, under oath in court, he had to say that he didn't believe Donald Trump's claims about the election being stolen. And I'm really interested in this because I've been arguing, as many people have, that cable news is just this pernicious element in our politics, and
Hmm.
the goal is to create division, and to split
Hmm.
our polity. And here's a clear example of an actor who has to admit that under oath. And it's odd to watch that this is the number one
Hmm.
news show in America, and
Hmm.
he's back. He's back on air. He doesn't
Hmm.
address it in any public way. The news station doesn't. He's back, and what they've done, actually, they've leaned further into absurd. So now he has like a live audience, and people are
Yeah.
applauding and all this stuff. I'm seeing that. The question there for me is like, what does it mean to have a society that does not care that such an egregious act happened at the Capitol building 2 years ago, and that the people who perpetrated this can still bring us news and information, and be respected and gain
Yeah.
high ratings.
Hmm. Okay.
It's no
So I
truth.
feel.
It's a lack of desire for truth. It's like truth doesn't matter. We're here to be entertained, perhaps.
Hmm. Definitely. I mean, in a sense, the question is, if we're interested in asking, how does one cultivate a desire for truth? Um, I think that in some sense, uh, it's necessary for those in power to constantly be rerouting and diverting any successful ascertainment of a true position, right? So you have to ask yourself, from the position of power, how is the world analyzed, right? From the position of the Fox News, this is why I always love this Succession show on HBO. You may be familiar with it, where they have
Great show. Great show.
yeah, they have a wonderful portrayal of Rupert Murdoch's family. You know? And if you look at the logic by which this family puts forward their program, and you ask, how do they understand the power of society? You know, they're very honest, which is that they are terrified of uh, proletarian or broad subaltern empowerment or mobilization on a grand scale, right? So therefore, they see the art of mediatized entertainment as a weapon for the pacification of any true antagonism from below.
Mhm.
So in that sense, we live in a world in which power has created these outlets and receptacles of a kind of well-lubed machine to prevent the possibility of agitated consciousness or political organization or what I would call kind of outlaw or illegal solidarities to even happen.
Mhm.
And that actually gets us into the heart of things like intersectionalism and CRT, because I think what's interesting about them is that they signal two versions of the wrong. So they are philosophical methodologies that are examining ultimately what is a philosophical question underneath, right? Which is what is the makeup of the perpetuation of an oppressive system, right? And what's really interesting to me is the way that the spokespeople of whatever point of view or whatever ideology um, also possess a certain agenda in some sense. And so that's why I go back always to the position of the organic intellectual, where you have to have as a thinker, whether you adopt, because there's many perspectives you can adopt as a thinker, but what is your solidarity with? Is your solidarity with, because CRT, for example, critical race theory, um, has a foundation in the legal academic field, and it's composed of lawyers predominantly who put it forward. And my only hesitation with CRT, one of my main hesitations, is that I perceive in CRT at the end of the day, after all is said and done with CRT as a movement, I think that it is a limited analytic framework because it's not interested in revolutionizing the status quo as such, in my opinion.
What do you?
I think
Why?
that
What? Yeah. Tell me what you mean
I
by
think
that.
because the class position of occupation of the people who invented CRT
Okay.
remains at that place. Number one. Number two, um, I wonder to what extent it is reliant on and there's been things written on this that I think are somewhat persuasive to me. Is the CRT model um, racially pessimistic in some sense? Does it hold within it the possibility of a true transformation? This is what I always ask my socialist comrades, which is like, do you think that you're a socialist because you believe that socialism is going to help alleviate the suffering of people? Are you a socialist because you think that in a socialist society, people are not going to be as envious as they are in this one? Or are you a socialist because you think that in a socialist society, things like violence will become more manageable? My position is we have to affirm all of those things as true. CRT, although maybe there's some outliers, I'm not sure that it holds to that transformative of a vision of society. That's my one question with CRT. I think yes, there's a lot of merit to it, but nonetheless, I'm very skeptical of pessimism these days. I don't think we have time for pessimism, in my view.
Hmm.
I think we need. I think that I've seen enough and experienced enough to know that this society needs to undergo a transformation, and that what matters is how we form solidarity with one another amidst that transformation. And
Right.
as such, it's very important not to uh, reinforce a kind of fatal pessimism of the status quo in
Yeah.
some sense. You know what I'm saying?
And when you say that, you mean even like a commitment to the like terms of division, I guess. I'm wondering your because part of the problem for me when I hear someone say CRT, you just articulated an interesting critique that I find interesting. But I've seen people, they'll point to some news article of a teacher in a middle school who is making the white kids uncomfortable or something, or creating some sort of a game where talking about oppression where people are separated in the class. Um, And not only is that just an example of someone doing something in a classroom, it's not reflective of the roots of CRT that you're pointing to. Um, but when I think about what's needed in our society, I'm talking about hmm,
Well, I mean, I think the problem is critical race theory is a kind of offshoot. Like we have a emancipatory tradition, right? We have a tradition, but that tradition, like I mentioned with this movement of post critique, right? That tradition has become fragmented because our society has been in need of socialism and of a socialistic revolution for too long, and we have grown exhausted. So we're now at a stage in our social intellectual life where ideologies emerge, which are not necessarily advocating universal emancipation. In fact, many of them are putting under scrutiny the very idea of universal emancipation. All I'm saying is that um, it's the same thing I would say in the debate between, say, Bernie Sanders or Obama, apropos the African American community. I mean, clearly Sanders is never going to win on the terrain of the Democrats. But if he did, I guarantee you, in my opinion, his the experience and the quality of life of the black population in America would way increase, way above what Obama would do. We
right,
already know that net wealth went way down under Obama, for
right,
example.
right, right.
That's a fact. So the status quo is not serving the people. So, do we then put forward a vision which is going to be particularistic and non universal? Or do we recommit ourselves to something more universal? I'm of a more universal camp, and that's going to take a certain solidarity to achieve.
Well, this
Now,
puts me in the
so
whole thing. I mean, this puts us to like the conversation about the left and what the left is and how we can define the left.
yeah.
One of the things that upsets me again from my vantage point at CNN during the 2020 stuff with George Floyd was it seemed to me that the media used George Floyd and used that political moment for as many clicks and views and ratings as possible. And then when it came time to talk seriously about what it means, what does policing mean? How do you police neighborhoods of poverty, and how do you deal with the racial residue, which makes it such that black people are overrepresented among the poor and in these urban centers where people are packed on top of each other, where crime can be rampant, where police are sent out there. This conversation about restructuring society, investing in communities, investing in schools, investing in education, young, early education, investing in communities, and that this was flipped into, they use words, you know what I'm saying? This was flipped into some defund the police thing, which was a scary buzzword, which could be thrown aside offhand without diving into what it is. I'm also troubled by at that time. Again, George Floyd was just one of many people killed that year at the hands of the police. Many of them were white.
Mm,
In fact, every year, black people are overrepresented in that marker, but they're about 1/3 of the deaths typically, and the other 2/3, will comprise everyone else. There's a lot of white people, and yet the conversation was necessarily racialized,
hmm
such that it ignored scores of equally sad cases of dead people who happen to not be black, and I think that the
hmm
movement suffered from that, like this
hmm
this preoccupation to talk about things in a certain way and to be less interested in our citizenry. um I mean, it was a handicap to the movement, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, man. I mean, I don't have an answer on this or a sort of solution or like the silver bullet. I mean, I wish that we did, right? That would be that would be nice. All I can say is my impressions. I think you're right, right? I think that we've come a long way from Huey Newton's view, because Huey Newton would go to these conferences of Marxists, and he would say in the 70s that the traditional working class is no longer the revolutionary agency, but it's actually the class position of men like George Floyd, the lumpen proletariat, who we put as the Black Panthers all of our trust in, right? Because they are the ones who are also revolting in Indochina and in Africa, Algeria, all these struggles was not the working classes. In some sense, the working classes were, and this is of course what he's getting from Franz Fanon, right? Now, it's very interesting that George Floyd happened to be a kind of lumpen proletariat because nobody said that. Nobody, that wasn't even mentioned. That wasn't even talked about.
But that's
I
see,
think it,
that's the
I think
whole.
it should have. I think it should have been.
But
Right?
the whole game is, as you talked about, this kind of keeping people from having any glimpse into a deep discourse of the condition of truth. You know,
Yeah.
you talk about him in a very different way, and then you get exactly what you want. You want a kind of racial unrest and, you know, a discourse around police, and you can kind of come up with slogans like ACAB, but you don't talk about the deep
Well, yeah. This is
underpinnings of it.
why an intellectual is faced with a decision. This goes back to the CRT point that I made. This goes back to the organic intellectual point that I made. In some sense, an intellectual can fall in line and not question the guiding ideological mantras of how we talk about these categories of police brutality, of race, of class. You can kind of fall in line with the kind of establishment view on these things, or you can critically go beyond them and arrive at a place which is uh, more true to the situation. And in my opinion, I feel that this is like sort of what we need. We need to sort of radically question these things in a spirit of comradeship with each other on the left, and create opportunities for, because you know what's happening is that a lot of people in the Black community are actually like leaving the Democratic Party because there's a sense in which everyone is so censored about how to frame things, how to understand things, that what's happened is that the whole framework of seeing social life in America is controlled by a kind of white middle class ideology, right? And it's very narrow
The
from
liberal,
its own.
liberal white middle class ideology.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Very narrow from its own position. And it polices
Yep.
discourse on that basis, right?
Hmm.
So that's actually why Trump himself, and I don't think he has a future, by the way, but that's why people of color went over into his camp. I mean, we have to ask, why did they do that?
You know,
Well, it's because they're being alienated, and put into these kind of boxes by the democratic ideology in some sense. It's
which isn't rightfully and meaningfully, genuinely seeking to address and alleviate the condition of hopelessness and poverty and
right,
undereducation. They're not
right.
seriously into that project,
Mhm.
which is another thing I want to
And
say,
why are they not? Why are they not?
because they're
Because
part of the whole program, the whole yeah,
Exactly. So this is but then you see they want to police
yeah,
what types of solidarities people can have with each other,
and
right?
how and the right terms of it for sure. But
Right, right.
I think, you know, and I think you're pointing to something, but also, yo, it's 2023, man, and I truly believe that, like, so there's you've articulated um, a mode of reasoning for why some black people might be interested in the Republican Party. Okay,
I
but
don't I don't think that many are, but I mean
no, no,
it's a
no,
trend.
no,
It's
exactly.
a, it's a trend. It's a
But
trend. It's a
it's a
trend.
trend, and but it's among trends is what I want to point to, fam. It's like we're things aren't like Andrew Tate is a trend, and, you know, Ben Shapiro has 4 million followers, and people are just listening to things, and, you know, the two parties have their way of keeping the game between them, and so there are, you know, there's the whatever, the Forward Party, however you think of that. The Green Party's been around for so long, and so I see less and less people moving between parties and being able to articulate some deep reason for it. It's like, I don't know. I feel discouraged by the way I think there's more celebrity and mood and visibility happening than
Mm,
even an intellectual choice, you know? And
mm.
that's really scary for me, because it feels like a new ground here where it's like, again, like you
Yeah.
said, it's not about, hey, explaining, hey, both these parties are playing against each other and playing each other in order to get your votes. It's like, I don't care, Republicans,
Yeah,
and it's,
exactly. It goes back to this notion of a post-critique society, right?
yeah.
In some sense, let's imagine we had a third party, and let's imagine this party was socialist, and let's imagine this party called itself like a workers' party or something like that, and let's imagine that they had a spokesperson who people listen to in some sense, and this person just kind of told the truth, right? It's kind of like lifted all the veils, right? Lifted all the BS, right?
Right.
My claim would be that this person would likely be crucified in some sense. Like it would be. We're at a point now in the discourse where we need to be very creative, because these sort of apparatuses, both of the mass media, but also like the day to day grind of this kind of current status quo, has really taken a lot out of people, right? It's really has exhausted people. So yes, people are hungry for the truth. It would definitely be welcomed. I think if we had a third party that really did speak a platform of a clear um, lane, saying things as they are, addressing the egregiousness of the complicity that the Democrats have with the finance class, for example, as one example, it would be cathartic. It would be music to our ears, but it would also produce a lot of reaction, which we would have to be prepared for. That's something we should be honest about. Like for me, I'm committed to a socialist politics because I think that we need universal egalitarian. We need to teach the people to fall back in love with the idea of equality, right? This society has drilled that out of us, right? And so what's needed is a broad scale socialist education in
So
basic principles,
so
right?
let's do this. Let's do this because you can't see the comments, but HW Plainview's back. I'm gonna ignore this Obama thing here with the reparations. I'm gonna I'm just gonna ignore that, and if I could delete it, I would. But let's go to the one he wrote a comment that I think is legitimate, and it's one that says it was the free market that elevated, or a legitimate question that you can respond to, Daniel. It was the free market that elevated billions out of poverty in the 20th century, not socialism. The free market is a good thing. If you had an opportunity, like, how would you respond to what he just said there, or do you even agree with the premises?
I don't agree that the free market lifted people out of poverty, because the free market, full capitalism, the only means by which capitalism became redistributive, became at all an egalitarian system, was because of the existence after the Second World War of a communist superpower, which was rivaling American capitalism around the world. And that rivalry forced American capitalism to become more socialistic. So, democratic socialism, through the kind of FDR welfare state, which was extended all the way up through Johnson's Great Society, and which was dismantled with Ronald Reagan in the early 80s, that period of time was not owed to the magic whims of the Adam Smith invisible hand of the market or anything like that. I think that's a fundamental misnomer, in my opinion. Redistributive, that was more socialistic. That
It
that
was a
period of
labor
time.
movement.
It was brought out through labor struggles as well. So we've lost touch with that. We don't. But the trick is we don't want to simply resurrect that. We can't do that. We need something more fundamentally transformative, in my opinion. Um, so I don't see a panacea of libertarian open market capitalism as it exists right now, producing an increase as it did in the post-war period, which again had everything to do with the Soviet presence, believe it or not. That's what I would say to that.
Okay. Yeah, I think the other thing, I sometimes when I people talk about markets, I have friends who are libertarian and they go on and on about the value of markets, and they brag about the idea of making government so small you can drain it down the toilet, and you could have markets everywhere for every social service, and could be done by some awesome corporation who do it for profit and do it better, right? Do you remember when Trump was running? The whole idea was that he would run the government like a business,
Right.
and that this was a selling point, and people started running with that. And Fox News would talk about
Right.
this because, of course, a business in the myth is some kind of an efficient system. Um, when, of course, the whole point of a good, well functioning government is that sometimes it can run in a loss to
Mm-hmm.
provide a benefit that the society agrees is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
The whole concept of of operating government as a business is completely backwards and ass backwards. But I think what you're pointing to here, this lack of of a socialist education, lack of a, the market, the whole invisible hand, the propaganda concept makes it seem like there's some magic element happening here. When in fact you're really just talking about, kind of authoritarian elements in society's businesses that have at this point, the whole concept of free markets. I laugh at, especially after 2008.
Mm-hmm.
After the housing crisis and the government's bailouts. How do
Right.
they continue with it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this points to, again, you're what you're saying. Like, you can't just keep pointing it out. It
I
doesn't do
mean, the
anything.
reason Black Lives Matter happened in Ferguson, Missouri. Let's analyze why it happened. Yes, the epidemic of brutality towards black people from police, absolutely. But there was another very specific post 2008 set of policies known as austerity, which did which functioned to penalize the people, to extract fines and fees in egregious ways, to make up for the fact that pure capitalism has completely abandoned the marginal tax rate, right? So when you abandon taxes on the wealthy, what you end up doing is penalizing the poor, which in America happens to be predominantly black people. Ferguson emerged and was so militant because the people were exhausted with that austerity imposition on them, which was, and there's been so many studies on this. And it just so happened that was replicated in many other cities.
Mhm.
Same dynamic, same dynamic. So part of that struggle also was tied to the crisis of capitalism. After 2008, capitalism became a penalized, disciplinary, punitive type of system. That's why people actually refer to post 2008 capitalism as resembling a type of neo feudalism in some ways, right? Look at what they do with look at the way that the IRS tax code functions on income tax versus inheritance tax. There's no IRS swarms of agents going and doing anything about inheritance tax.
Right.
But the vast majority of people that get into fancy colleges and universities don't come from the income of their parents. It comes from the inheritance. It
Hmm.
comes from their family inheritance. So we live in a society which has a rigidity of class conflict right now. We don't see it because we have apparatuses which don't allow us to
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
But
and
that's the truth of the struggle. The
we have.
truth of the
Yeah.
struggle is those class conflicts which we can't see.
Yeah.
That's why it's rare. They have to be exposed. That's what I mean by socialist education. That's what I mean. It hurts to learn these things, right? But we got to talk about them and expose them. That's why I'm opposed to the post critique thing, where they say, "Oh, let's not expose things. Or there's no use in exposing things." I think that's all crazy. So, anyways, now I'm all hyped up. I'll stop now. Sorry.
No. Don't stop. Here comes more from Plainview. What? There are millions more poor whites than blacks in America. I don't think that's what he said. In fact, I know that's not what he said. Or the point is that the proportion, obviously, but Daniel here,
What's the point? What's the point? What is he
like the
trying to say?
question that like Daniel has no. Well, here's the question: what there are millions poor white than blacks in America. I think he wants to rebut what you said earlier about the plight of black poverty. But I don't think that you're here to defend or denounce white
I'm not
poverty
trying
either.
to say that. No, I'm trying to say that for many years, for decades, the struggle of poor whites and poor blacks, the ruling class has prevented them from forming solidarity. But in reality, there's nothing more dangerous than that solidarity. The problem is it's really hard to achieve, right? Because of the various impediments. But I mean,
Well, the very,
brother,
to me,
I would want nothing more in this life than to see progress happen on that front. That's the dream of the late Martin Luther King Jr. That's exactly what he was doing. That is the kind of future, right? That's what everything should be centered on in some sense. If we can affirm that type of linkage in our organizations and so, and I believe that socialism is the best way for that kind of thing to happen, right? I don't think that the current liberal politics, even the progressive version of it, is interested in that. I actually think that they're hostile to it, in my opinion.
they absolutely
Right?
are. Yeah, the point is to continue to hash out these superficial
No, yeah,
discussions and to distract people with different versions of identity politics. Again, I'm framing it identity broadly here, identity politics broadly, like to continue to play into these divisions. It's also it's entertaining and it also keeps us away from the actual kind of liberation that's needed.
I
Um,
couldn't agree more.
so tell me a bit about mental health in relation to psychoanalysis
Yeah,
because I'm interested more and more than that. Like, one of the ways when I think about psychoanalysis, I think it's a philosophy approach that speaks to the same things that like scientists and physics are coming to. The
yeah,
realization that, in my view, that it's all one thing, kind of.
yeah, yeah,
And one of the ways that I've been talking about mental health is this realization that of our projections and our
yeah.
perspective, the understanding that we are the perceiver, and that as the perceiver, we're also part of this thing, and we have to take that as some of the mental health challenges that we suffer from
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
myriad sources, but that one of the things is this separation that occurs. Anyway, I'd like to just kind of lean into hearing more about mental
Yeah,
health from your perspective.
for sure. I mean, I became convinced of psychoanalysis after undergoing psychoanalysis for myself, and it struck me because I had done, as a child who experienced a lot of like difficult childhood, um, I needed therapy as a kind of necessity, right, to work through certain just really crazy things that happened in my life, right? But after trying out cognitive behavioral therapy, trying out different forms of kind of positive therapy grounded in positive psychology, or even delving into self-help, things like that, I never found something as rigorous as I did in psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis opened up um, what I would characterize as a certain mystery. Psychoanalysis, one thing that I liked about it, I'll tell you one thing I really liked about it, is that it opened up a mystery of my own family heritage, which I wasn't looking at properly until I did psychoanalysis. Because like it allowed me to understand certain repressions that have been embedded in my own family past, and even in the past of my family, like my mother and father, which they hadn't explored and they hadn't opened up. Because in general, in the psychoanalytic view, the structure of our psyches actually go back about 3 generations, right? So like that proximity to our immediate relatives is extremely important.
Mhm.
And so uh, anyways, psychoanalysis became something which for me helped to produce a sense of a true transformation um, by getting in touch with what they call unconscious desire, right? And understanding certain blockages. Its method is what's called free association. So it's very simple. You just go and try to enter into a zone of free association with your analyst so that your speech is not, impaired. And then in that speech, new problems emerge, new barriers that you were not aware of. In other
Right.
words, when you're in free association, your unconscious begins to speak.
And you're
In
saying not impaired by thought. Is that a fair thing to say?
Not impaired by the day-to-day um inhibitions that
Hmm.
we experience. So therefore, what does that mean? It means that when you do analysis, like, it takes a while to get to the couch where you lay down. It takes a while to get comfortable. It takes a while to have rapport. It takes a while to trust the other person. Under those conditions, then you create new um, barriers, and you create even fictitious barriers. And when you create fictitious barriers, you see that certain um, anguish or turmoil that you are experiencing in your life, you see it from a completely different angle, and you can try to you become your own best therapist in a certain sense, being
Hmm.
able to lift certain blockages
Hmm. Hmm.
in a certain way.
Yeah.
So it's all about the management of repression in some ways, because in a way um, we don't ever forget, we repress more so. And oftentimes when people lie, they're repressing a truth they can't speak to directly.
Right. Right. Right.
Being able to, another great thing about psychoanalysis is that when you understand and you assess a loved one's behavior, let's say that was very bad, when you assess it from the standpoint of psychoanalysis, you become more forgiving because you begin to see their struggle in many more dimensions,
Exactly. Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So you therefore remove the sense of revenge, of accountability, in the way that you maybe naturally are drawn to, right? And
Yeah.
I know this firsthand, because one of the big important things about psychoanalysis is the uh, necessity for the cultivation of strong psychic figures in your life. Like, working through attachments that you have to other people is super important.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, you kind of need to have a certain stability with people in your life. So, anyways,
Hmm.
that's a bit of
Does the
some
word
things I like about it. Yeah.
does the word non-duality mean anything to you, or the phrase, term?
Um, I mean, it's an interesting argument. I mean, I'm thinking here also of non-binary. I mean, in a sense, psychoanalysis,
So those are
because
two
it
different
is
things, by the way, in my view. Non-binary
okay.
and non-duality. But go ahead.
In a sense, I think that um, the foundation of psychoanalysis is understanding um, human conduct, human behavior from a dualistic point of view. In other words, there's that is from a conflictual point of view, right?
Right.
There is a constitutive double bind, what's called the double bind.
Right.
What is the double bind? The double bind is a beautiful concept created by this cybernetic theorist called Gregory Batson. And it basically says that the structure of familial authority in the Western culture is built upon a contradiction at its core, which is that how do you manage the injunction of the repressive law with also the same desire to transgress that law? You need to have an authority figure who, this is the, say, classical position of the father. The classical position of the father in the Western culture is a figure who's meant to serve over both the yes and the no. In other words, the father is meant to be a kind of uh, a figure that opens up, a kind of sublimation, overcoming of barriers and so on, as well as the one who
Punishes.
lays down the law and punishes.
Okay.
Well, Batson showed that in some other societies, that's like through anthropological studies, for example, that's actually not how fathers are construed. There's usually like two fathers, actually. There's one father who's more Dionysian and sublimatory and affirmative. And then there's another father who tends to be like an uncle who's more prohibitory. But it is the Western father that has this double bind. And it's a very interesting conundrum for the father. That's actually one of the things I write about in my book, right? Which is the changing valences of the authority of the father figure and how we understand that in contemporary society, because it's changed so much, right? I mean, even back in the 1970s, all the literature was talking about how absent fathers and the father's position in the family is changing and so on. And I would argue that now it's like at a post-crisis standpoint, right? In some sense, there is no kind of normative place for the father. We've lost touch with that whole thing in some ways, right?
We've lost touch with fatherhood. Is that what you're saying?
We've lost touch with fatherhood. Yeah, I would say so. I
So
would say
I
so.
think we've certainly lost touch with manhood in the sense that the definitions have been so not updated, haven't been updated, and so we've allowed. I think um, in our society we don't have this threshold where the boy goes through a challenge and then becomes a man. But tell me about fatherhood, because to me I don't know. I'd just like to hear more about what you're saying there, because okay, let me just continue a bit to say that for me, when I think about sort of the mental health challenges and this split, I look at internally. I think the human condition seems to be such that what you said earlier, there's a shadow that we all have. There are things that we lie about. There are things that we lie to ourselves about. There are experiences that are so painful that we don't properly internalize them. We our body might remember them, but we don't consciously bring them to the forefront and bring them as part of our identities. There are things that we associate with, and we say that we did this. I was active on this, and then there are things that we also do, but we subdue that narrative, and we might say that it happened to us, rather than to take it on in an active voice. And I think that what happens is this causes a lot of strife and difficulty. And I think what I've learned in my years is like the more I'm honest with myself, deeply honest and aware and present, I can find the opportunities to notice these moments in myself when I'm casting things into the shadow. I'm avoiding stuff. Um, and when I notice that, and it's happened so many times now, I've been able to shed some of these things through noticing it. And this goes back to what you're saying. Like, I develop a real sense of empathy, right? I have an opportunity now to notice that, man, not only am I shedding things, not only can I notice myself 5 years ago operating in a robotic fashion because of these fears and these anxieties and all this stuff, but that I can look at other people and say, I can notice that they too are going through that same predicament, and this kind of it produces an overwhelming sense of
Hmm.
empathy and understanding
Hmm.
for people.
Hmm. Hmm. No, that's really good. I mean, I think sense of empathy is important also for politics, for the possibility of solidarity. You have to have that. But I think um, to go back if we could to this question of manhood and fatherhood. I know you wanted to broach that question, and it's an interesting one. I mean, I guess to the extent that I would say we have a crisis of fatherhood, it would be that the traditional conception of the father has died, but in the literature on patriarchy in capitalism, you have to understand that people were talking about the death of the patriarchal father in the 1830s, right at the very beginning of the industrial moment, right, of industrial capitalism, right? So there's something about capitalism which actually profoundly weakens the family, in fact, right? Which is why even in revolutions, right, historically, especially in Europe, those without families were like the lower class people without families were very revolutionary. It was a very revolutionary social position to have. So like I think though that we're at an inflection point with um, a clear sense of well, there's definitely a certain crisis of masculinity, which we can talk that through. And I know that you're deeply engaged in that question yourself. I mean, for me, like I think there's to an extent there is definitely a crisis, but I also think that um, it's a lot of it is very overblown, especially when we look at the way that it appears in the field of politics. Like I definitely don't think
Mm.
that I definitely don't think that um, men are somehow mortally wounded, today by the proliferation of new expressions of gender identity.
Right.
I
No, I
actually
don't think that's
I
right at
don't
all.
see it that way at all.
Not at all. No, 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 no. You
You know
see,
what I
but
mean?
this is what I'm saying
But
because
but that's
people,
how some people frame it,
of course, and some people. So
right?
I'll go to back to Ian here. He says, see, we come to any subject and people have their angle and their perspective, and I think that you want to leave space for it, but also I don't know. This is a difficult question of truth again, right? So here's this comment. Thomas Sowell would say that we incentivize single motherhood through the social welfare state. No, I've heard that argument made, and
Well, first of all, the social welfare state has been destroyed gradually, and it's not incentivized in reality. I mean, speaking as someone who's from a single mother household and from someone who has family members that had to be on welfare, is nothing glamorous or desirous about those programs. Those programs are meant to pauperize people. It is a total myth, in my opinion.
pauperize, PAUP, pop.
Yeah, pauperize to
Mhm.
keep them. Yeah, look, I'll give you an example. What income level do you have to be at to qualify for Medicaid, for like free health insurance once you hit 63, 64, whatever?
I don't know.
You have you okay, you have to be close to homeless, right? In order to qualify, right? So there's a myth to accelerate middle class resentment that social programs that help poor people are panaceas for those poor people, that they somehow enter into a state of leisure and undeserved free time. I actually think go to welfare housing and see the depravity of the situations that people have to face, the daily violence they have to face, right? It's monstrous. So those programs are not uplifting or empowering programs, but they're not meant to be. They're not meant to be. I think that a socialist vision of welfare is fundamentally different than a capitalist vision of welfare. A capitalist vision of welfare is meant to maintain the structure of resentment that we currently have in our society. We can do much better than that, right? I mean, people right now are retiring without their dignity in government homes. The Medicaid system is, in my opinion, I mean, I'm glad that it exists, but it's to the point now where it's almost like I don't know, it's unreformable in some sense. The whole thing needs
Yeah. Well,
to be scrapped in some sense. So
one of the things I think is so funny sometimes is the when people want to point out social welfare, they obviously it's always downward. It's always there's always the conjured image of the welfare mom. We don't talk about the tax incentives, the tax
oh yeah.
breaks, the loopholes, the the grants, the subsidies. Obviously, 50% of our budget each year goes to violence and war. And then just the enormous, not even to mention the big stuff like 2020 for the corporate welfare from 2020 to 2008, the housing crisis, the financial crisis. where there was no improvement to that situation. There were no new barriers to prevent it from ever happening again. They introduce a concept like too big to fail, and then they just foist that on us. Our tax dollars go to this thing, an upward transfer of wealth, and it never gets talked about again. They go right back to being about capitalism again. It's very weird. Oh no, did I lose Daniel? I think I lost Daniel, guys. Let's figure this out. Oh, here we
Here,
go.
I'm here.
Okay, there
I'm
you
here.
go. There you go.
You got
Yeah.
me?
So I mean, so these ways, and this is much more prevalent. This is much more routine. This is how it works frequently every year, every year, every year. And yet, so for instance, what last year the conversation around student loan debt relief, right?
Oh yeah.
Then all of a sudden, boom, people come out. They're concerned about inflation. They're concerned about bad incentives. They're concerned about all these things. There's all these, as soon as the spigot of government benefits can be sort of tilted downward, even slightly, because that student loans is still, it points to a certain demographic. It's far from perfect, but to have people concerned with budgets and inflation and bad incentives and capitalism only in those instances is just, it goes back to the level of the discourse and the ways that our media just leaves us all confused.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's in some sense the system is designed to manage the discontent of people so that nothing changes, right? So you have to view society as structured in such a way so as to prevent. This is why, like, it's not enough to be like a nonconformist thinker. Like, you have to go deeper. Like, again, I want to repeat this whole strong criticism that I have about the way that a lot of intellectuals are treating what they call post critique, right? That, like, there's no use in exposing power and all of that. No, like, that's why I like what you're doing on this program with many of the things you've done about the media and exposing the way that things work. All of that stuff needs to happen just much more on a much wider basis. Like, this is why I was very inspired by Kashama Sawant in Seattle, who was a city council elected socialist. And she said, you know what? We have like something like almost 300 elected officials who came in through the Democratic Socialists of America across, the spectrum, from like Rashida Tlaib to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to like a bunch of people at local level as well. But all of them have basically submitted to the Democratic Party's agenda, which means that all of their socialist principles have been totally sidelined, right? So she said, you know what? I'm not going to run again for city council. And I'm going to rather start an effort to elevate the education in socialist education for the people. And I kind of like, I'm very happy that she's doing this. I think that's actually what's needed right now, because we're at an interesting point right now where, like, all of that energy of the squad, all of that post 2020 Floyd uprising energy has kind of hit the wall of the establishment, right? And it's kind of tragic, but we're faced with a question and a decision of like, okay, well, what does this mean? What does
Right.
this mean if
Right.
they are the hope of our generation? They are the hope of our generation, but we haven't been able to materialize a transformation
No.
yet.
No.
And it's not a generational thing. It's not just like, oh, the boomers are still alive and still in power. No, when the boomers are about to initiate the largest wealth transfer in the history of the world when they die. What do you think the politics of their kids, and I don't mean all of their kids, right? I mean the kids of the upper and upper middle class, when they receive
You're
that
talking about
inheritance.
inheritances and stuff
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
What do you
Okay.
think that's going to do to their politics?
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that even amongst young people, even amongst very progressive people, I think that we're going to see a lot of shifts and changes that we need to be conscious of towards more conservative positions. I'm just as a warning. I don't mean to be pessimistic or anything like that, but I do fear it. I do. I don't know if you see it that way, but
I just
I
think,
do. Yeah.
you know, I'm more and more saddened by the fact that I don't think, there's a deep anti-intellectualism going on. I don't think people are really motivated by deeply grappling with issues of social betterment, good politics, civil society,
Yeah.
what that
Oh,
means.
there's a lot of cynicism. Yeah.
It's cynicism, and I think things have been reduced so much to marketing. It reminds me when I first started BB Digital, and I would work on these, like, people had these projects, and they had a project that was 2-3 years down the line, and they didn't know how it would go, but they knew they needed a marketing video. They knew they needed a marketing video, and that's all they needed, because if they had the marketing video, then they could raise money, and then and so you do this marketing video that was entirely, it was full of presumptions about things that might happen, but they weren't necessarily there. And that's where we are, and our politics are there. And we have a crop of people in the political realm, in the media realm. We have a crop of managers and elites that are very much in the game of just talking about things, saying buzzwords, um, capturing audiences, uh, and
We need to. We
it's
need
not
to.
attached to, and of course, like,
Yeah.
the underlying foundation of all that is capitalism. There isn't. You're talking about
Yeah.
an education that's far beyond needed. Yeah.
No, I mean, I totally am with you. I mean, I think the hard reality is that at least we should retain the memory of the way that struggles have played out since 2008. Just look back at what all we've experienced. I mean, from the Tea Party to Occupy Wall Street, to like um, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, the rise of Sanders, Corbyn, all of this, that period from the 2010s up till 2020, that whole like period was an fascinating moment of the birth of something which was quelled by the pandemic. The pandemic stopped it in its tracks. But underneath, it represented the demands of and the yearnings and the misery of the people. And we can't lose track with that, right? That's how I see like truth in some sense. Truth for me, when we talk about what's truth, truth is found in the emancipatory screams and demands of the people. And then if you can locate that, you can get a glimpse of it. And that's where like the truth is like, because that's why like I love this whole thing from the birth of the French Revolution to the present. The demands of the French Revolution could be seen as unmet demands that we still try to live out in some sense. I love that notion, right? So for me like I don't know, man. I think that 2020 was a moment of a great reaction. And I think that we're in a moment of a reaction, right? And that's no surprise that people decided to vote for someone like Joe Biden, who is a bit like Bush, right? Because the psychology of Bush and Biden are very similar. They both became appealing out of their mediocrity,
You talking about
right?
Bush 2 or Bush 1? Bush 2,
Bush
obviously.
too,
When
Bush
you say
too, Bush too.
mediocrity, you're talking about Bush 2 for
Mediocrity,
sure.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Because both of them couldn't form a sentence, right? Both of them were like a bit of like silly, not definitely not competent.
You
That
know, I
wasn't the point. That wasn't the
yeah.
point,
See,
right?
I
That
you
wasn't the identification.
exactly.
We needed a mediocrity because the monstrosity of the problems that we were facing were so
Yeah.
immense,
That's
right?
right. See, that's what you came to it there. That's what I want to point to is much less, it's just an escapism from the monster. Particularly, I think, again, the media did us a disservice. Donald Trump was not a great president. Was a bad president. I'm glad he doesn't have a second term. At the same time, to beat that horse of the evil orange man, repeatedly every day in this way, um, put people on such an edge, and it warped the entire discourse. Where now, Joe Biden is continuing things that Donald Trump did, particularly on the border, things that at the time when Donald Trump did it, you know, there was a lot of like silence is violence, and people were like, these are terrible acts, and now you have the same media outlets simply not covering it, simply not interested in it, and that power that they wield is so powerful that they literally can, and that's what, you know, that's what happened. The George Floyd thing and COVID, they can move entire huge swaths of people. So I'm excited too by the idea that, you know, not only with this show but so many other shows and these platforms on the internet can sprout that can kind of have us speaking directly to each other again and trying to ascertain truth, trying to point out problems and develop new language and new modes of communicating that we don't have these interlocutors confusing us and bullshitting us to death, you know. Dude, we're at an hour 30, man. I want to let you have a
Oh, wow.
last word, man. This kind of flew. That was awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So, man, yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, this has been good. You got me super enthusiastic and motivated. I mean, I love talking about these topics. I don't know. My last word is that the politics of truth can once again matter. That we can, but I guess my main point would be that we have to resist this turn in our society to put forward this cynical rebuttal to the mere suggestion that deeper truths matter. We're saying, well, what has it done for us? What does revealing the truth actually do? I think it actually can produce a lot, and I think that people are quite hungry for it. I mean, you can just see it when you talk to people that you get the sense that the script of the ideology that people have in their mind about how to understand the world, people have a sense that it feels phony to them. People have a sense that they've been lied to in some sense.
Yeah.
So
That's
you know what I
been
mean?
uncovered big time for sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So in that sense, like yeah, I guess that this requires a certain philosophical approach, and
Yeah.
you know, I think we share that, me and you, in different ways, obviously, but
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, we didn't get into the depths of the psychoanalytic stuff. I just kind of touched on it, but
Yeah.
it's just one very rigorous method also to kind of use all of its tools to analyze society as well, which I do a bit in my writing and stuff like that. But you can have me on to talk about my latest book on Nietzsche at some point. I don't know if you're a big
I'm
Nietzsche
with it.
philosophy fan or not.
I know him superficially. Yeah, I don't know him as deeply as you do. Yeah. But
Okay.
and I'd love to hear more about particularly his, you know, his ideas and his life. I mean, apparently he had a really interesting life, and some people think he was crazy. Some people think he was racist, among other things. Right? Didn't his sister or someone accuse him of?
His sister was racist.
Oh, his sister. Oh, okay.
He was his sister actually legitimately left Germany to create like a eugenics racial superiority colony in South America, as a precursor to even like Nazism. I mean, Hitler gave Elizabeth Forster Nietzsche, when she died, a state funeral. I mean,
Wow.
Hitler walked around with Nietzsche's cane. It was the Nazis imbued Nietzscheanism to the marrow, to the core, right? People, the scholars of Nietzsche obviously dispute. They say that the Nazis were mistaken in their reading of Nietzsche, which is a whole debate we can have. But
Yeah. Listen, so last thing, Ian's posting a few things. Many of them I disagree with. I think Ian's on a rant. He wants to be a little bit
what's he saying? I can't see it. I can't.
yeah, you can't see it. Well, he's justifying the Iraq war on terror, the invasion of Iraq, on the count of Nietzsche's or his sister's racism. He says most humans are ethnocentric. I think he's kind of in a mood for a fight today. But I think the most interesting thing that you could reply to is somehow this person who a moment ago was arguing for the benefits of markets also says that the best thing society could do is to have Andrew Yang's, what's it called?
UBI.
UBI.
UBI. Hmm.
So that's an interesting thing. What do you think about Andrew Yang's, real quick, before we get out? The UBI.
I think I think that in principle the UBI has merit, but the problem is it doesn't address the root of the redistributive nexus of contemporary capitalism. It's a band-aid solution. It's a band-aid solution which doesn't transform the situation, and it also um, well, I mean, it also just simply would never happen. Let me put it that way. It would never happen because the financial elites would never allow it to happen. So I think that it's a foolish notion to begin with. And it's one of those things where everyone knows it's never going to get off the ground. But I mean, just look. I'll give you an example. Look at the turmoil amongst the chattering and ruling classes, at the modest, extremely modest UBIs and wealth and money transfers that happened during the pandemic.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Imagine if they allowed that to be the standard every
Right.
month, or
Exactly.
they would never allow that
See,
to happen.
and
See,
they
this
make.
goes back to capitalism and its
Exactly.
necessity of resentment.
See, this is what
It would
people
never.
need to
It's
contend
never
with.
going to
Yeah.
happen. It's never going to happen.
Not only that, but another thing went completely under the radar, which is government subsidy in the form of PPP, which is the PPP sort of private. What was it? What are those private partnership? It was direct to corporations. So we have the state again feeling comfortable to do this, but directly to people, it doesn't float at all. Anyway, first off, Ian, the Iraq War was a monstrosity and a moral. You called BLM a moral panic. Iraq was a moral monstrosity. Killed
So
lots of people.
Ian's opposed to BLM, but for Iraq War.
It seems so today. He's in that mood today.
Is Ian a friend of yours? Or?
I went to high school with Ian. He is a friend of mine. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, we
right.
we clearly have several things we disagree with each other
That's
on.
all good. That's what we did this show for.
That's
man.
what it is, man.
Man, thanks for having me on.
Yo, thanks, bro.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I did, man. I'll let you go, man. Have a great night. Tell Beth I said what up.
All right. All the best.
Peace. There we have it. That was the chat with my good friend Daniel Tutt. It was a bit longer than I hoped, but got a lot of juicy stuff in there, and I hope you appreciated it. Thank you very much. Honesty and empathy. Have a good night. Peace.
It's Billy. Right now. Yo, what if I got attacked by the clones? What if the builder think they found a better stone? What if the beat don't match with the metronome? What if that means you walk your path alone? Call me a vagabond. If all these streets leading to Rome, then wherever I lay is my home. It's Brooklyn, boy strong. I manifest, I'm in the zone. Y'all silly better back up off my throne. Listen, boy nice, better give him his propers. How we come out sane from all the mosh pits. How we found the key to the game without a locksmith. How we seem to manage these lanes is so obnoxious. He let it flow from the brain, trusting the process. A vet journeyman on multiple rosters. If I want it, I go out and get it and cop it. A monster with limitless options. Man, like goddamn, y'all gon' soon figure out who I am. We stay cooking, y'all used to that spam. Western beef, I might square up at the square dance. Look, I change plans, not even a southpaw, I'm an outlaw with a rare stance. Your crew never had a fair chance.
Why is that?
I kill a whole bear with my bare hands. Oh, they studied the dark? Well, I was raised in it. Brain shifted, the kid displayed insane physics. Best story never told, and it ain't finished. How we handled the rock, spun and kept the same pivot. I frame different, hot like a flame kitchen. A whole 2 levels out of your range gifted. Catch me on the highway, lane switching, or right at the top of your Bay wish list. It's Billy. Right now. It's Billy.